Hello, Rob. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having
And
me.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm going to do a little bit of introduction for the folks of ours who have just joined us. And come on in, folks. There's some pizza on the side and some water. Feel free to enjoy yourself. So, just a little introduction. So, for those of you who don't know Rob and his work, he has created an animated show called My Life as a Teenage Robot
This
and
was
won an
an
Emmy for his.
animated.
Let's see, I'm gonna mute these folks. Sorry, guys. Okay, thank you. So, and you've won an Emmy for your work on a show called Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Rob has also worked with Disney and Netflix, among other networks. He's also written a new, funny, scary middle grade book called The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things, which we'll be talking about. There you go, which we'll be talking about as well. So thanks for joining us. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that you're an Addison native, and you
Yes.
mentioned that your love of reading really started here at the Addison Public Library. Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Well, sure. I mean, it wasn't that version of the Addison Public Library. I'm old enough that I was when I was a kid, it was the original Addison Public Library, which I think was kind of north across the parking lot or something
Yes,
like that.
a few hundred feet. Yep.
Yeah, it wasn't that far away. So I was an avid reader as a kid, and of course, got a lot of the books that I fell in love with from the Addison Library. I can't think of anything specific right now, but I do remember taking out starting my first science fiction reading was Isaac Asimov's Foundation
Yes.
series, and I believe I checked those books out from the Addison Public Library. So yeah, I was born and raised in Addison. I was my parents' house was in the Westwood division, actually on Westwood Trail. I went to Wesley Grade School, which was right around the other side of the street I lived on, and then Addison, Indian Trail Junior High and Addison Trail High School. So yeah, I'm born and bred in Addison.
Great. So I know you're a huge fan of horror movies, shows, and books, but you got your start in animation, working with fantasy and some sci-fi elements. How did that come about?
Well, that was what I wanted to do when all the time I was growing up. I was a huge animation fan, watched whatever I could see on television. One of my cousins was a huge Disney fanatic, though he didn't draw himself. He didn't have any aspirations to be an artist, but he was a huge fan of Walt Disney and all the Disney stuff. And so he had a bunch of Walt Disney books and stuff. So anytime I'd go over to his place, I would hide in his bedroom or sneak up to his bedroom and like palm my way through all his books. And back in the day, you couldn't see Disney cartoons on TV, so that was the only way I saw Disney. But I watched Warner Brothers and the Fleischer cartoons with Popeye and all the Hanna-Barbera stuff. I watched all that growing up, and that's what I want to do for a living, and that's what I have done for a living for most of my career. I live in Los Angeles now. Actually, came out to Southern California to go to California Institute of Arts, which was kind of the premier and still is the premier animation school in the U.S. And then I just kind of stayed out here and got a job at Hanna-Barbera. And then, like you said, I've worked at I've worked at Nickelodeon, I worked at Cartoon Network, I worked at Disney, worked at Netflix most recently. So I've been working in the animation industry for about 30 years. So my writing career has kind of just become an offshoot of that, because my whole career I've been writing. I've just been writing for cartoons. I've been in the part of the business where you come up with stories, you come up with gags, you come up with dialogue for the characters. Someone's got to kind of create all that stuff, and was always an artist writer doing both. And then eventually I was mostly just doing writing scripts for the shows I was working on. Like the latest show I worked on, Kid Cosmic on Netflix, I was kind of the associate producer, but also the story editor for a while, and rewrote a lot of the scripts and wrote a few myself. So I've been kind of writing my whole career, but then writing in book form is something that's kind of been in the last 10 years or so. I've been able to do that. Disney gave me the opportunity to write some books with them. I ended up writing 4 different books for their existing properties. And then I worked on my first original idea, The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things, for the last few years. And it just was finally published this summer. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear all about it. I'm sure our viewers and listeners are as well. Now, you mentioned that you started writing about 10 years ago for fiction and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
but are you still doing any animation work? Is that
Um, I am, yes. Though the animation industry is going a bit through a bit of a lull right now.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
I was at Netflix for a while, worked on Kid Cosmic for I think about 3 years, and then I was working on another project that didn't see the light of day for about another year and a half. And
Okay.
then they kind of just got rid of most people that were working there. And so I was mostly concentrating on my fiction writing for a little bit, and then most recently I've gone back to Disney and I was working on a project that I can't really discuss. There's a show they're doing, Big City. It's called Big City Greens, which I had actually worked on earlier. I came back to that and was helping them. They're doing a movie, like a made for Disney movie. I think it'll be on Disney Plus. And
Okay.
then no details have been released, but I've been working on that. I'm still working on that. I was kind of full time for a while now. I'm just doing some freelance work for them while I continue to write the trilogy, the Horrible Bag trilogy. It's actually going to be 3 books.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'm kind of balancing both right now, but most of my time is spent writing the books and a little bit of time still in animation. So
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you. Now, in a previous interview, you mentioned that you would create an outline which artists would use to create storyboards.
yes.
And let's see, for any given episode. But what was most important to put in your outline for artists to wrap up like a world of imagery around it? What was it that really helped them kind of create?
It's live.
Sorry.
I think that was the net.
Yes, it
Um,
was.
I'm sorry. Yeah, can you repeat your question?
Sure, sure, no problem. So I was saying that you would create an outline which artists would use to create storyboards for any given episode.
Right.
But what was most important to put in your outline for artists to wrap a world of imagery around what you've created?
Yeah, I mean, having like I started off as a storyboard artist myself. That was the first job that I had in Hollywood and Hollywood animation community. So I would work off outlines as well, which was basically you'd be doing a 7-minute short, and it would be you'd maybe get like a page description of what the short should be. So you're inventing a lot of stuff, but I think what you're referring to is just the idea that you want to try and give an idea what the visuals and what the thrust of the episode is supposed to be. Like, what's the idea of the episode? Like, what's important about the episode, and where should they spend their time and their emphasis? And being an artist myself, I tend to write visually. I tend to write a lot of visual description and stuff, and trying to give them a starting point so that they're not just starting from nothing. Because when I was a storyboard artist, I found it very helpful if I was given at least a strong perspective in the outline of like, this is what is important, this is what we're going for. And then you have something to build off of. You have something to start with.
Got it. Okay. All right. So, how do you go about constructing character, plot, and theme in any given show?
Well, I mean, if it's a creation of my own, I just kind of take inspiration from wherever it comes. If I'm working with somebody else, and most of the shows I've worked on have been created by somebody else. I've only created one show myself, but usually I'm intimately involved in the creation from a pretty early point. But even so, like on Kid Cosmic was created by my friend Craig McCracken, who more famously created the Powerpuff Girls a while back. He came to the table with a lot of it all figured out and most of the characters figured out. But even if most of the characters are figured out, you're going to as you go forward in the series, those characters always change and grow and evolve. So, for an animated show, character really is central because you're going to be telling multiple stories. Even if, a book, you can get away with like one good story, like you can do one and done. You can do one book, never do a sequel, never do anything else with those characters. If you have one good story, you're set. But in a show, you're going to do at least a handful of episodes. If you're a Netflix show, maybe you only do 6, but on an old traditional show, we'd get 13 episodes a season, and there'd be 1 or 2 or 3 cartoons within that half-hour episode. So we had a lot of stories we had to tell. So you have to have strong characters to start with that you really know and really know what their perspective is, so that you can create stories that work for them. So that's in animation, you got to start with the characters. In writing your book, you have a lot of different avenues in that you can approach. The horrible bag of terrible things, actually, the title is what came first, and I didn't even come up with that.
Your wife did, right?
My wife
Yeah.
did, yes. So, you know, that was all I had for a while, was the title, and I didn't even know what it meant, but I just know I liked that title a lot.
Yeah.
And then I was, you know, at some point something attached itself to that title, and I went forward from there. But in animation, you got to really get your characters locked down. That's how you can create episode after episode, and that's how you usually are able to sell the show to the people that will give you the money to make it, which is like you give them a strong set of characters that they think the audience is going to fall in love with.
Now, you mentioned that Netflix might do 6 episodes. I'm thinking back to old school days. We mentioned Hanna-Barbera before we even started recording this episode. And watched the Flintstones, of course, Tom and Jerry. Do you know how many episodes they would do in a full season back then?
I mean, I have no idea. I mean, a standard season for a long time was 13 episodes, but I don't know if that would apply to the Flintstones, which was was a prime time show. You know,
that's right, yeah.
That when it first aired in the 60s, it was on, you know, in the evening for adults and kids to watch. And I'm not sure how many episodes of the Flintstones they got that first season. I suspect it might have been as much as 26 episodes, because I think that's what a live action show would have gotten back in that day, at least that much. But when I started in the business, 13 episodes was considered a full season. And that's what we kind of, you know, when we first, the first show that I worked on that went to become a series was my friend Gendy Tartakovsky's show, Dexter's Lab. And we only got 6.5 hours of that to start with, because they weren't sure that we were going to be able to pull it off. So that was kind of like a half season. And then after we kind of got going for a while, they gave us 7 more to kind of complete what would be a traditional first season, though those second 7 were considered the second season. And after that, they were so enamored of us, they give us 39 episodes all at once.
Wow.
To like take us to what 52 was considered like a full run. Like if you got the first 52 episodes back in the day, then you could go into syndication. You know, that was kind of like, that was the end. You got to 52 and then you were done. So we got we got the 6 to 7 and then 39 all at once to get us all the way up to 52. And
wow.
That was a huge vote of confidence, and also like a real pain in the neck, because we had no break. We just had to keep coming up with story after story after story. And I remember there were several occasions where our story editor Jason we'd come up with an idea and we'd all be like, oh, it's kind of thin, like there's not much there. Jason would be like, we have 39 half hours to do. And you know, and there's like multiple episodes in a half hour, like, so we have hundreds of stories to come up with. If this one's a little thin, don't worry about it. So it was a bit of a trial by fire, but it helped us come up with stories.
How long would it take to do a 13 episode season?
I mean, you know, it could take maybe about 1.5 years, maybe would be a comfortable schedule. You know, and everything's overlapping. You know, you don't just work on one till it's done. You start one, and then that one starts going, and then the next week you start another, and that starts going, and you kind of have you have all these overlapping lines on a schedule where I wish I had one of those examples to show you, but it's like, it looks like a big patchwork quilt where it starts off nice and innocent with like one thing going, and then you drop down to the next row and another thing's going, and then another thing. By the time you get in the middle of the season, it's just a big chunk of different colors, and you're like working on all 13 half hours at once, and they're all in various stages of production. So it can be a bit daunting, and you need a good team of people with you to get it done.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned Disney and Netflix. What do you enjoy most about working with those big production companies or that sort of thing?
I mean, the difference, there's really no difference between there's a little bit of difference in terms of culture between the big companies, but really in animation is such a small part of the entertainment industry, and it's kind of a small industry in itself. You kind of run into the same people over and over and over again. People move around, especially artists like myself. So what happens is kind of like a place will become popular, like all of a sudden, like when Netflix a few years got a big infusion of cash, like they just started hiring people from the other studios, and like the word gets around, and like, you know, hey, you know who else is at Netflix? You know, like, oh, Craig McCracken just moved over there. He's doing a series for it. and like your friends will get hired, and then they'll see you'll hear about it from them, and you'll ask them, well, how's it like over there? And they'll be like, it's great, you got to come. And like, so the various artists who work in the industry are just kind of like vagabonds who like roam from studio to studio, and like they go for the project. And that's the way the studios have set it up. They don't necessarily hire people for like, you've got a 3-year contract. It's like, you've got a contract for the show. You're getting hired on the show. And sometimes, depending upon your position, you can be there for a few years for getting that show. Sometimes you'll be there for like 6 months. If you're just a writer or storyboard artist, you may only be there for like 6 to 9 months, because that's as long as they have work for you. So the culture really is about the executives. The artists are kind of just this big group that move from studio to studio, depending. Some artists will like stay at a place for forever. The Simpsons has been going for, I don't know, over 30 years. There are some artists that have just been there that whole time. That has been their career. But it's more common for artists to kind of move around and stay at a place for a few years, then move to another place. The longest run I ever had at a place was at Disney, and I was there just shy of 7 years, I think. And then I left to go to Netflix. But usually I stayed at a place for like 4 or 5 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, depends. So the executives are really the ones that form the culture at the different studios, because they do stay there. They're hoping to stay there for a very long time. And most of them are very, very, very nice. All the nasty people in Hollywood don't work in animation.
I can't imagine.
The nasty climbers are in live action. They want to get all the way to the top. So the people that are in animation, of course, have career aspirations, but they're generally a nicer bunch of people. So I was, before I worked at Disney, I'd heard horrible things about it, and none of them turned out to be true. It was a wonderful place to work with in Disney television animation, and wonderful people that I worked with, and wonderful executives. So, and that's been my experience in most places. I haven't met a lot of bad people, even among the upper executives. They're usually very nice.
Great. Now, in reading one of your interviews, or maybe it was watching, I forget which one it was, but you mentioned you have one of your favorite characters is one of my favorite characters in animation, Scrooge McDuck.
Yes.
What draws you to that character?
Well, it's interesting because I love the version of the character that isn't an animation. It's the one that Carl Barks, the famous artist, drew for decades. I was not much of a comic reader when I was a kid, and one summer I was visiting with a friend of my mom's, and her friend had a son who was a few years older than me, and I always like looked up to him, and he was reading some sort of Marvel comic, and I'm like, what's that? And he's like, well, I knew what comic books were, but I'd never really seen them or read them. And I was fascinated by like just the imagery and stuff on the page, because I'd really not gotten to look at one at that point, surprisingly. And but I wasn't into the superhero thing. I liked funny animals. So while I was on vacation, we went to a drugstore, and the drugstore had a rack of stuff. And like I said, I was like obsessed with Disney, because Disney was inaccessible. You couldn't see Disney cartoons, but they had a bunch of Disney comics. And Donald Duck, the little bit I'd seen, I loved Donald Duck. He was my favorite character. And I saw several of these were Donald Duck comics, and they ended up being the Duck comics that Carl Barks drew. So that was my introduction to Scrooge McDuck. And I just loved, when he first appeared as a character in those comics, he was basically Scrooge. He was basically Ebenezer Scrooge. He was like a skinflint. He was very, very negative, very, parsimonious, very like, was a miser, basically. And it was interesting because Carl Barks just discarded that very quickly, and he became this swashbuckling adventure character. And I just loved the fact that he was, that the money didn't mean to him what it meant to most rich people. It was a signifier of his value in a way that's different. It was a signifier of his adventures in his life and what he had done to achieve that money, and how smart he was, and how he had outwitted the other person. And that was what the money represented to him. He really didn't care about the money. He did nothing with it. He just put it in a giant bin. And so it was I just fall in love with the character. And I'm luckily now they're reprinting all the comics that he did, and I'd go reach for one on the shelf, but I have a stack of them. Fantagraphics is republishing them. And when I was a kid, I saw just a fraction of the stories that he wrote, and they'd reprint the same ones over and over again. So often I'd see the same ones pop up. But now I'm seeing every single one that he ever wrote. It's like being a kid again. I'm really
Huh.
enjoying myself going through them all. So I highly recommend the Carl Barks Duck Stories.
Well,
And
thank
you can
you.
get very, very great. You can get beautiful editions of them right now through this new Fantagraphics collection.
Great, thanks for the suggestion. And I'm going to kind of mosey on over to other portion of creativity that you've been endeavoring in of late, your work of fiction. So what I'd like to ask is, when it comes to this latest book, The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things,
Yes.
this book and series to be, since you're working on, I think you're probably done with the second book, aren't you?
I just saw it again for a while, but yeah, it's in the middle of the publishing process. I just had my chance to make a few more changes
Okay.
to the manuscript, but yes, it's practically done.
Okay, cool. So when you were first thinking about this book, I saw, just reading the description, I saw a little bit of similarity to some other works, like the bag being sort of like the wardrobe from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, along with some fresh ideas that you put a unique twist on, a spin, and that sort of thing. How did all of, because writers, we all come up with different inspiration. What was it about perhaps some of the other things that you've had with inspiration, and how did you put that together with some new ideas that you added?
I mean, I don't know. I just kind of like I said, I started with the title of the book, so I kind of just went outward from there, and the process is it's kind of ephemeral and hard to describe. I mean, someone said this to me the other day, and I thought it was a great it's an old phrase, but it applies, I think, to your creative life, which is you are what you eat, meaning all the stuff that you've watched as a kid or read as a kid, it all goes into your mind and germinates there. And if you're a creative person, it comes out in different ways. So you're always looking back to the stuff that you were inspired by and taking little bits, stealing little bits perhaps, or being inspired and putting a new twist on things. Lee mentioned The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, which I did read when I was in my teens. And another huge influence I would say on the book is Alice in Wonderland, which really comes through in the second book, which is called The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment, because I have like a courtroom scene, which was very much inspired by the courtroom scene in the Alice books. The bag itself is actually mostly inspired by cartoons, again, by Felix the Cat, who in his 1960s version, he had a bag of tricks. It's called Felix's Bag of Tricks. And this bag on the cover very much is shaped like Felix's Bag of Tricks. His was a little bit more pleasant looking. It was a positive thing, not a horrible thing, but or a terrible thing. But I've loved that concept when I was a kid, and so the bag was definitely inspired by that. But as far as like putting a new twist on things, it just kind of whatever came to my mind and whatever I enjoyed, I decided would go in there. The land inside the bag, the hidden land inside the bag, is called Grabag, and that's a very, very thin change to the word grab bag, which I wanted to call the place Grab Bag, basically meaning like I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff into this bag. I want to have monsters that maybe don't seem to make sense in the same world, but they're all going to be in there. So there's a gargoyle, and there's a giant 7-foot living rag doll, which is inspired by Raggedy Ann and Android. And there's other creatures in there that are just disparate. Some of them are more comical, some of them are more terrifying, hopefully. But like there's a range of characters, and they've all lived in this bag or been brought into this bag. We don't know what their origin is, but they're all in there in this world together, kind of coexisting or battling, as the case may be. But I basically tried to give myself permission to do whatever I wanted in terms of the characters that I created. As far as where they come from, they're kind of a mix of old and new, and hopefully some original stuff or stuff you haven't seen before. But it's hard to create anything that's entirely original, because so much has been done, and so much has been done to you, meaning you've watched so much and read so much in your life, it can't help but influence your own creations.
Yeah. Now, do you know where those characters came from?
What characters?
The characters that are in your world inside that bag.
Well, I mean, I know like I was just talking about the 7-foot tall ragdoll. He's called Raggedy Albert, and that's a very quick allusion to Raggedy Ann and Andy. And my fascination with those characters comes from my childhood as well, which was there was in my childhood home, there were two things from my mother's own past that preceded my creation, which was we had a giant, like, old-fashioned hi-fi console in the front hall that we had gotten from her parents and was in her house when she was like, when she was a kid. And the other thing was an old Raggedy Ann, two collections of Raggedy Ann and Andy stories. And they were just in the front room in like a side table, and they were just there. And I discovered them when I was a kid, and I looked it up. I opened the book and it said, to Sue, who was my mom, like, and it was clear they were given to her when she was a child. And I just was fascinated by the illustrations, because again, I was fascinated by anything that looked cartoony or any kind of art. And these characters were both so appealing and at the same time so creepy. I think Raggedy Ann and Andy are very, very strange looking characters, and some of the illustrations inside are even stranger. I did a newsletter about this a while back with for my subscribers, but I grabbed some of the images from inside the book, but they're very strange, and I was just very fascinated. I don't know if I barely read the stories inside, and mostly just looked at the illustrations, but it would be kind of on my normal circuit of things that I would do if I was playing at home, which is like, I'd play with my big bag of Legos, I'd play with my Hot Wheels tracks, I do other stuff, and then every once in a while I decide I got to go look at those books again. And I would just go and look at them. They weren't forbidden; they were out in the open. It wasn't like I couldn't look at them whenever I wanted to, but I kind of felt weird about it because they were my mom's. And I think she might have scolded me once to just, in the very softest way possible, just to be careful and not to damage them. And so for that reason, they were very special to me and very precious. But that's where Raggedy Albert comes from. He's just kind of made a kind of a direct influence from Raggedy Ann and Albert and Andy.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the animation type creation, I guess you can say, is very visual, and obviously you're watching it on the TV screen as a viewer. But when it comes to fiction, you're just writing words. So how was that a difficult switch for you? I know you're probably a big reader too, so maybe not, but how was the creativity there, the difference for you, that big switch?
Well, I mean, like I said before, I've been writing animation for a long time, writing outlines and writing scripts, and you have to describe things visually in those versions, because that's how a lot of things are going to be translated visually. A lot of times in an animated show, we do a huge sequence where, like, there'd be no dialogue, so you have to, if you're writing that kind of script, you really have a lot of description to do. So it wasn't so different, but it was a challenge to take my descriptive language to kind of the next level. And but I kind of set those challenges for myself. I kind of was describing a strange new world, and so that was going to be a challenge. The characterizations and the dialogue comes a little bit easier to me, but the visual descriptions of, say, like a new location or whatever, as Zenith Maelstrom, who's my 11-year-old hero, is kind of making his way through Gabog in search of his kidnapped sister. He comes upon these strange characters, comes upon these strange locations, and I have to describe those and try and put some imagery into the reader's head. So, that's been a challenge for sure. And I feel like I've gotten more adept at that as I've written the first and then the second and now the third book. But it's still a challenge. And the lucky thing with writing a book is you'll get several chances at it. You write your first draft and send it to your editor, and they'll tell you where you haven't quite hit the mark. So there's comfort in that you have the chance to go back and change things. So I try not to get too hung up on getting it perfect the first time, but I try and get as close to mark as I can within the amount of time that I've been given and the deadlines I have. But yeah, no, that's been a bit of a challenge to move into it, but it was a challenge that I sought, and so it's been a fun challenge for the most part, and I feel like I've risen to it, I hope.
Good. Now, The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things is a middle grade book. Would you say that your, I guess you could say, viewers from all the TV shows that you've worked on, would this be sort of a natural type, smooth transition into your fiction?
I think so, yeah. I mean, that is the audience that I have been that I've been writing for my whole career. Most of the shows I've worked on have been what they say targeted towards a middle grade audience. That verb is disturbing, a little disturbing to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is the audience I've written for. This is the audience I feel comfortable with. So I think it will be that age group will feel very comfortable picking up this book and reading it. And I hope there's enough there for adults and readers of any age to enjoy. There's a lot of spooky things, nothing too heart-stoppingly scary, but some creepy moments and a lot of humor, and a lot of black humor, a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor. So I think readers of any age will enjoy it, but it certainly is targeted towards middle grade audience. Zenith, like my hero, is a middle grader. He's 11 years old. He's got an older sister, Apogee, who just turned 14. So those are the two human characters that are the most prominent in the book, and a bunch of monsters that I think most kids who like any kind of creepy stuff will certainly enjoy.
Okay. Now you said that you've kind of always, created for that type of age range. What about that? Well, okay, you said target. So what about that target age, we'll just say, really appeals to you, that makes you, drawn to that age? I guess you can just say that age.
I mean, it's an important time, I think, in most kids' life. It's when you get in that middle grade, the name itself kind of tells you that you're kind of in the middle of things, that you're kind of transitioning from being what you think of as a kid to a teenager and then to an adult. And it's a time when the direction you're taking in life can change. Pardon me, excuse me. Oh,
bless you.
Tried to hold off on that as long as I could. So I mean, so it's an impressionable age, and I'm hoping to make a good impression on these kids, and perhaps make them see things in a little stranger light. It's meant to be a strange, kind of off kilter, weird book. And being kind of a weirdo myself, I think weird people are good. I think the world needs more weird people. So I'm trying to make as many middle graders a little bit weirder as I can, as much as I can. I think a little bit stranger perspective on the world is a good thing to instill in young people. So this is the time when kids are kind of deciding who they're going to be, and they kind of have the first chance to kind of define themselves, both in terms of who they are in their family, who they are with their friends, and who they just are on their own. I hope the book, it's mostly an escapist fantasy, but it's got some things to talk. It's got some serious things that it has to discuss about life, and I hope those things will mean something to the readers.
When you were talking a little bit earlier about middle grade, but also having some dark humor in there, it made me think of Pixar films, but not necessarily, other than perhaps Coco, which really has some dark, story subject matters in there and so forth. I just started watching it on TV the other day, as a matter of fact. But in thinking about your latest book and really your series, you mentioned earlier that you liked horror, you liked that kind of goofy, maybe not goofy, but like dark humor. Fantasy was obviously a big thing. I'm picking up on this mysterious mojo that this is something that you've really always kind of done in your work. And is there anything in like this book, or perhaps the second book, where you're writing and then you're just like, something's not just not feeling right, and then perhaps you added some kind of weird twist or some zany humor or something like that really kind of put it in a different direction or made you get back on target? Did something like that ever happen?
Sure, it happens all the time. I mean, you mentioned the second book there. The Twisted Tower in the title is a place that Zenith unfortunately goes to visit, and I don't want to reveal too much, but basically the Twisted Tower of Endless Torment, the title kind of sets a certain bar of expectation for how strange things are going to be. And the first draft that I sent off to my editor, she pushed me to make things stranger and to make things more twisted. So that section of the book is something that I radically changed upon the second draft. And actually I started heading in a direction during the second draft, and I was almost done with that new direction, and I made another big change before I ever turned it in. In fact, I missed my deadline, and I told her, it's not quite right yet. I've got to go back in and tweak it in a different direction. So, draft 2 never really saw the light of day. It was kind of draft 2.5. So yeah, that kind of thing happens all the time. And it's interesting because when you're writing the first draft, it's like, it feels like everything, this is exactly how it has to be. And how can it be any different? And then you send it off and you forget about it a little bit. And then it comes back to you with notes, and sometimes you're like, mostly I've worked very well with my editor, and we see eye to eye on almost everything. So when she has a note about something, I either already had that note and was just like, well, I'll worry about that in the second draft, or when she brings it up, I'm like, you know what, you're absolutely right. And she was right about the tower. It needed improvement. And I felt like I was right when I decided, like, the improvement's not improved enough. I've got to go back in and do more. So a lot of things changed. It's interesting because the process, it's hard because when you know something's not quite right, sometimes the right thing to do is to stop and just recalibrate and go. And sometimes the best thing to do is just like go ahead and realize I'm going to come back to that. And then once you get away from it a little bit, come back and look at it with a slightly different perspective. Usually you'll have new ideas. But yes, that happens all the time. And actually, it's one of the joys of writing is that you get several cracks at telling one story. More so than you do in animation, where you're like, you got to write that story, you got to get it into production, you got to get it out. And if it's not perfect, you'll do better next time. The books are a little bit more precious. There's only going to be 3 of them for now, and I want everyone to be as good as it possibly can be. So I take my time going back into it again and again and again, which is both a pleasure and also a great frustration. That you're like, especially when you're like, no, this is in print, I can't change anything anymore. Oh no. But,
could you show that cover again? I want to see it.
Sure.
I just think it looks great.
Yeah, I love it. I'm very happy. MS
exciting,
Corley is
basically.
my illustrator, and he was one or two illustrators that Penguin brought up, and I just fell in love with him. And on the back we see that's the gargoyle Kriebel, who is one of the main characters from Grabog that Zenith interacts with. She's my favorite character in the book, actually. So yeah, that's the first book.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. I was going to ask a little bit about the Tower. I know you mentioned that. It made me think of Dark Tower. Stephen King. Have you read that series, the Dark Tower series?
No, my wife has, but I have not. We're both big fans of Stephen King. She is more so than I am. She's read or listened to the audiobook about just about everything that he's written. In fact, she just finished listening to his collaboration with Peter Straub, The Talisman.
Yes.
And I've never read that. But I've never read there is a fantasy element in here, but I'm more of a horror person. So I've really mostly read his horror movies, and I've stayed away from his more straight fantasy fiction. I haven't read The Dark Tower. She's kind of recommended one of them to me. She thinks, I think this is the one you like the best. So I may pick that up, but I've not read it as of yet.
I think the second one for the Talisman was called Bleak. No, that was Dickens. Black House. I think Stephen King is considering writing a third one for that, even though Peter Straub has passed away.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Yeah. I just found that out about a week or two ago. But getting back, I did mention Stephen King, and there is horror in there. You mentioned that there's some fantasy in this one. But you've also obviously horrible, right? Everything that goes down in Gerbog.
Yes.
Yes, I wrote it down. I knew it was I had to write it down to try to remember how to pronounce it, Gerbog. But what is it about horror that has kind of made you a lifelong fan?
I mean, I don't know. A lot of people wax philosophically about how what's the word, cathartic horror can be for people, and it's certainly there is that aspect to it. I just think it's the fact. I think it's basically the fanaticism of a convert, meaning that when I first was born into this world, I was a huge scaredy cat, and would not watch anything even slightly horrific. Was terrified of that. I accidentally saw the 1930s Dracula at one of my mom's friend's house, who I was over there visiting. A couple of her older kids were watching it in the kitchen, and freaked me out, and I had nightmares and was worried that I was going to get attacked by Dracula for a very long time. And then I saw Frankenstein, and actually Frankenstein cured me because he was the monster that wanted to be friends with kids. As far, at least that was my interpretation of it. And so I fantasized that Frankenstein would be my friend and that he would protect me from the other monsters. But yeah, it was a slow transition for me from being horrified of everything horrible into becoming a horror fan. And actually, one of the, I kind of fell in love with Hitchcock movies, which isn't really horror, but kind of maybe horror adjacent, except for, Psycho, which I saw when I was a little bit older. But this kind of kind of black humor of Hitchcock was definitely a huge influence and definitely helped me transition into darker material. And then I read Edgar Allan Poe. My mom gave me a collection of his short stories when I was stuck in the hospital one summer and for a few weeks, and I fell in love with Poe, and that was kind of my transition into horror. And then I kind of dined on crappy Saturday morning horrors on the local UHF station there, Channel 32.
Svengoolie, do you remember him?
Svengoolie came along a little later, but I would mostly there was just like with unhosted like Saturday morning horror movies, or not Saturday morning, but Saturday afternoon. Morning was for the cartoons, and then in the afternoon they'd play some like Dementia 13 or some other very old black and white horror movie that really wasn't very scary, but it was just the right amount of scary for me because I didn't want things very scary. And then as I got older and I was a teenager, that's when Son of Svengoolie came on. He was calling himself Son of Svengoolie back in those days before he dropped the son and just adopted Svengoolie. I guess he's old enough now that he can be Svengoolie. But yeah, I used to watch Son of Svengoolie all the time. There was back in my Scaredy Cat phase, there was I forget what it was called. I think it was made called Creature Feature. There was one evening I was hanging out in my brother in his bedroom, and he had his own TV up on the wall. And the introduction to this Creature Feature show started, and it was this dark, like London street with just a couple, old-fashioned gas lampposts or something, and this ghoul like was off in the distance, and he's slowly walking towards the camera with this horrible music. And then you got close on his face, and it was kind of like he looked kind of like the old Phantom of the Opera, but
I was going to say Lon Chaney.
Yeah,
right?
It was kind of like, he kind of looked like that, but it was so scary. I was so scared by that. I was just like, I was not ready for that. And I never saw that show again. I don't know what happened to it, but by the time I was ready to watch horror movies, Son of Svengoolie was the host.
Okay. Now I've kind of tap danced around your book. I'm going to get a little bit more description for our viewers out there, because we are recording this and they'll be able to see it on our YouTube channel in posterity.
Oh, wonderful.
So there's a character that you have, your main character name is Zenith, and he finds a bag. A spider emerges, kidnaps his sister Apogee, and enters a terrifying world called Grabag. If I got that right.
Grabag.
Okay.
So it's the opposite of grab bag. You got to change the vowels to make it different. So it's Grabag.
Grabag. That's right. Grabag.
That's what the H's in there are supposed to cue you in.
At this point, Zenith needs to escape, basically, Zenith needs to find his sister Apogee and then escape from the bag.
Yes.
So where did that come from? Those ideas? It's when we create fiction, we have to try to make something, in this instance, big enough for a few hundred pages. And in other instances, the premise has to be kind of similar, but very, an elevator type pitch, as they say, in writing and so forth. So this is very, very simple, but there's a whole world he's coming into. So what made you, I guess you can say, pinpoint on this idea?
Well, I mean, again, it did once I got the title, which is what I had at first, and once I had the bag, which I imagined, well, what could come out of the bag, or what could go into the bag, and the idea that there would be a world hidden in the bag was pretty quickly the next step, I guess, because I want, that was Alice. That's why Alice in Wonderland. That's Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? You have a character that enters into a strange new land. So it was definitely influenced by those books. And I knew it was going to be for a middle grade audience, and most middle grade books have middle grade protagonists. So I thought, like, well, who would be silly and curious and rather kind of dumb enough to bring this bag into his house. And that's where Zenith was kind of born, this kind of overly curious, adventurous boy, a risky, reckless kind of boy who does a lot of things that he really shouldn't do, but hasn't really suffered any consequences as of yet for all his kind of reckless adventures. And in this case is his sister who suffers, who gets kidnapped by the spider hairball thing that he dubs Schlurp. And so now he's brought this on his family. He's gotten his sister kidnapped, and it's kind of up to him to get it back. He's hoping he can get her back and get back in time so that his parents never discover the whole thing, and he can get away with it like he often does on other misadventures. But the main thing is he has to go rescue his sister, who he has genuine affection for, though they fight and tussle like most siblings do. That kind of, you have a character, you want to give them something worth fighting for and worth pursuing. So, the kidnapping of a family member is obviously something that people will relate to, and something that people will instantly understand is important. And that, he's not just going into the bag on a whim, for no reason. He has to go in there. He has to go to Grabog in order to save his sister. He has no choice. So you want to kind of push your characters into a situation where they have no choice, and force them into an adventure, and have them suffer and struggle for a while before they hopefully emerge victorious.
Okay.
No spoilers though. Who knows whether
I know. I was just going to say, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, but I'm like, don't give away too much. But
I won't give away anything. But
okay.
Since there's a second and third book, you can at least figure out that he probably survives in some form.
Yeah. So I was just wondering what readers could expect. They're watching this, they're hearing this, what have you. But what can readers expect for Zenith to find out when he's on his hunt and he's looking for apogee?
Well, I mean, there's lots of strange denizens of the Grabog. The guy showed you one, Kriebel the gargoyle. This actually becomes an ally of his, and becomes kind of a guide for him inside the horrible bag and in the world of Grabog. She kind of gives him the 411 on what's going on there. He makes alliances, he makes enemies. Raggedy Albert, we're not quite sure whether he might be a friend or a foe of Zenith's, and there's a very interesting interlude with him that I won't spoil. But he basically has a series of small adventures, much like Alice in Wonderland or whatever, where he goes around and kind of has to figure out things. He's reckless, and he's maybe a little too bold, but he's also clever, and he uses his wits, he uses his smarts to figure things out. And that and his bravery and his boldness in pursuing his sister's captors are what get him through. But there is a big bad, as Buffy the Vampire used to put it,
Yep.
a big villain that has some desire to do something terrible to his sister, and he has to save her from that. So things climb towards an inevitable conclusion where he confronts the main villain of the piece, who's called the Great and Horrible, the Great and Holy Worm, and he confronts him in the conclusion. And also we discover something about him and Apogee's history together, their past, and part of the reason why there's a little bit of tension between them, and there has been for the last couple of years. So there's some personal level stuff that gets revealed. There's a lot of fun adventure and horror and scary parts and funny parts, and it doesn't go on for too long. You can get through it quickly. It's a fun adventure, a quick adventure with lots of cliffhangers. I try to end almost every chapter on a cliffhanger, so you'll be compelled to read the next. So I hope kids and adults will enjoy it. It's a fun little adventure. I hope they'll find it to be so. I feel very proud of it, and happy to have it and its 2 sequels coming out into the world.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, just getting a description of Zenith, and like you said, the courage, bravery, making some mistakes. He's a little, charging into perhaps danger and so forth. I think a lot of kids can relate to that, and also, want to kind of be the hero, in this case, Zenith. So that, I think that's the perfect opportunity for a hero to see or want to see themselves and maybe look at that character and say, I wish I were more like Zenith in this instance.
Sure. I mean, part of what I wanted to do, and this was a deliberate choice of mine, was that, you know, there's the Harry Potter model of hero, but like Harry's got special abilities, like he's a chosen one almost basically. And there's a lot of kids stories and kids adventures that hinge on like, but you're the special one. There's nothing special about Zenith. He does no extra abilities, but he's curious, he's smart, he's bold, he's brave. These are things any kid can be. You don't have to be born a wizard to be brave. You just have to have the fortitude and the strength of character. And though he's got his flaws and gets himself into this trouble to begin with, he's strong enough and brave enough and to get him and his sister back out of it. And clever enough to do it. And, you know, these are traits that I think, you know, you can admire and you can see yourself in. You can aspire to be more brave. You can aspire to be more clever. You can't aspire to be, you know, born a wizard or, you know, or a werewolf or whatever. So, you know, as much as I enjoy those characters and I like, you know, there's no werewolf in this book, but there's other monsters. I love monster characters, but I feel like it's important to kids have a normal kid they can follow, a kid that they can see themselves in.
Okay, well, thank you. We're just about out of time here, but before we take leave of you, I would like to ask if there's anything you'd like us to know about your work, about this book, about the series, anything before we wrap up.
I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit, and I hope people will kind of find it either there at their local library in
We've got it.
Addison. Yeah. I'm very excited, and I was very excited to hear that when you first told me. So I'm so proud that it's on my hometown library shelf. But you know, either find it at your library or purchase it at your local independent bookstore or wherever you can find it. I just want people to read it and enjoy the story. I make these stories for people to enjoy, and I'm very proud of this one, and I hope they will seek it out and hope they will enjoy Zenith and Apogee's adventure and their further adventures in Grabog, which will be coming next year and the year after. And if they want to find out more about me, I have a website, robrenzetti.com. You can learn more about the books there. You can learn more about Teenage Robot, the show I created, other things I've worked on. And if you want to, you can sign up for my newsletter and at the website and get even more information from me if you haven't had enough already. But I hope at least you'll find The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things and give it a try. Because I'm very proud of it. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think kids and adults will enjoy it immensely. How's that for a pitch?
All right, sounds
Please
great.
pick up my book. No, thank you very much.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you
Steve.
so much for meeting with us. It's been a blast just listening to all of you've accomplished, and this series sounds. I mean, I'm already thinking of it being on Disney Plus at some point in the future.
Well, we'll see.
So.
We'll see if there'll be an animated version of it. I would love to do it someday. But
All
thank you
right.
so much. Thanks for everybody who watched, and thank you, Addison, for letting me grow up there and having such a great childhood in Addison, Illinois.
Thank you very much, Rob. Take care.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we are done.